Shall I proceed, Your Honours? Yes, thank you. Professor Ilan Pappe, good morning to you. Can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon to you.
Yes, so mine is good afternoon and yours is good morning. Huh? All right.
Yes.
So now you have had a sight of your CV. Yeah? You had a look at your CV? And this is indeed your CV?
Yes, it is my CV, I can confirm.
Yes. I shall just direct you to a few salient aspects of your CV, because you got a long CV. You are an Israeli historian. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you are professor with the College of Social Sciences, International Studies at the University of Exeter in the UK.
That is correct.
And you are also director of the university's European Center for Palestine Studies.
That's right.
And co-director of the Exeter Center for Ethno-Political Studies.
That is also true.
Yes. And you were actually born in Israel.
That is right.
In which place was it?
Haifa.
In Haifa. And prior to coming to the United Kingdom, you in fact were a senior lecturer in political science in Israel, in the University of Haifa, isn't it?
Yes, that is right.
And you have stated in your CV that's from 1984 to 2007.
That's right.
And you also held the chair of the Emil Toma Institute for Palestinian and Israeli Studies in Haifa.
That's right.
For some 8 years.
That is true.
And you have authored 15 books to date, and
That's
one
right.
amongst them is this book called Ethnic Cleansing.
Yes.
Yeah, and they largely deal with Middle East studies and Palestine, with some focus on Palestine. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
And you wrote this other book, Gaza in Crisis. There appears to be one of your more recent ones, together with the renowned linguist and person involved in Middle East situation, Noam Chomsky.
That is correct.
And you have also, after the release, you say, of pertinent British and Israeli government documents in the early 80s, you have been rewriting the history of Israel's creation in 1948.
That is true.
And relating also to the flight of some 700,000 Palestinians in the same year.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Pappe, shall I call you Dr. Ilan or Professor Ilan or Professor Pappe?
Whichever is convenient.
Okay. Okay, we'll call you Professor Ilan, because here we always refer to the first name.
Fine. Thank you.
Yes. Now, you have written that in 1948, expulsions of the Palestinians was not something that happened ad hoc, but actually constituted ethnic cleansing of Palestine in accordance with a designed plan. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. That's my contention, yes.
Yes. Now, what we would like you to do, Professor Ilan, is now, step by step, take us through the establishment of this contention that you have made, dating, if you can very briefly, from, say, the 20s, 26 onwards to the early 40s, up to the partition, and then the 1948. You could just very briefly take us through these phases in your own words. And for reference, you can look at page, I think, 15 onwards of your, what I consider to be an excellent book, page 14 of your book. I don't know whether you have it before you. Do you?
I don't, but I do recall the main events.
Okay, it's all in your hard memory, I suppose, huh?
Yes, it's with me all the time.
Yes. So tell us now, slowly and carefully, from the time in the 1920s when the Palestinians made up the majority of between 80 to 90% of the total population of the then Palestine. So can you narrate to us from then on,
Yes.
please? We'll be grateful.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, definitely. I should say that the Zionist movement, more or less until the beginning of the 1930s, was not particularly preoccupied with the question of what would be the fate of the native people of Palestine, who were, as you say rightly, the majority. It is around the mid-1930s that the Zionist leadership, and especially the leader of the Zionist movement at the time, David Ben-Gurion, who would become Israel's first prime minister, began to deliberate seriously what should be the fate of the indigenous native people of Palestine, the Palestinians. In around 1937, we begin to see, as historians, the first evidence for the plan that would be eventually implemented in 1948. The basic strategy that the Zionist leadership was pushing forward, and David Ben-Gurion, the leader, was the main architect of that strategy, was to try and take over as much of Palestine as possible with as few Palestinians in it as possible. And the means for doing it were not very clear in the 1930s as yet, because Palestine, as you all know probably, was under the British mandate. So the sovereignty, in a way, lay with the British Empire, and neither with the Palestinians or with the Zionist movement. But it's important to explain that around that period, the first notions of what should be the fate of the people of Palestine began to be articulated quite clearly by the Zionist leadership. And in very simple terms, that fate would be to leave the country either voluntarily or to be expelled, as the vision of the Zionist movement was that you could not have a Jewish state if you would have Palestinians in it. The crucial date for me, in many ways, I think, is the early 1940s, because this is when, as I describe in my book, the military wing of the Zionist movement, the Haganah, begins to prepare what I call in my book, but it also appears in this name in the archives, the village fires. This is a detailed description of all the villages, all the Palestinian villages in Palestine, with the idea of taking these villages over by force when the opportunity would emerge. Now, I should say that in the beginning of the 1940s, nobody knew exactly when Britain would leave Palestine. But it was very clear already in the early 1940s that the moment Britain would declare it wants to end the mandate over Palestine, that would be the moment that the Zionist movement would have to take Palestine by force and decide the fate of the Palestinians living in it. When Britain indeed made that decision in February 1947, the British cabinet had a crucial meeting in which it decided that it does not want to stay in Palestine any longer, and decided to refer the future of the country to the United Nations. At that very moment, the Zionist leadership, both its military wing and its political wing, moved from abstract ideas of what to do with the local people to more concrete strategies and plans. And it took about a year between February 1947 to around March 1948 for the Zionist leadership to prepare a plan for the systematic eviction by force of the Palestinians from Palestine. The plan eventually was translated into commands to the military units of the Jewish forces to cleanse by force village after village and to take over the 11 towns that Palestinians had at the time. And it would take another year, of course, but I'm sure we'll come back to it a bit later. It took another year for the plan to be completed. Not in full. The Israeli army was unable to cleanse every Palestinian, but within the space that became the State of Israel, which was 80% of mandatory Palestine, almost 85% of the Palestinians who lived there were kicked out by force in that year between February 1948 to February 1949.
Thank you. Now, I just, when you talk about this plan, we always come across what is known as Plan Dalet. Now, what is this Plan Dalet?
Yes, Plan Dalet. Dalet in Hebrew is the letter D, so it's plan number 4 in many ways. And there were plan number 1 from 1946, plan number 2 and 3 in 1947, which gradually developed into plan number 4. Now, plan number 4 had two formats. There was an official document called Plan D that was distributed among Zionist leaders in March 1948, in which specified the means of ethnic cleansing, but declared officially that this would not apply to the whole of Palestine, but only to the areas that the Jewish forces would take beyond the space that was accorded to the Jewish state in the United Nations Petition Plan. The other Plan D was the commands, 1,000 or so military commands that came under a big file called Situation D, Matzav Dalet, Situation D, which were actually a systematic plan for cleansing every village and every urban neighborhood in Palestine. The people who decided on that plan was a small group of people, about 13. Most of them were generals in the Jewish military outfit, Haganah. 3 or 4 of them were experts on Arab affairs in the Zionist establishment, and the person who chaired that group was David Ben-Gurion, as I mentioned, who would become Israel's first prime minister. And this group met on a weekly basis in Tel Aviv, and slowly and gradually turned Plan D into a master plan, into a blueprint for the systematic expulsion of the Palestinians from their homeland.
Now, so the idea was expulsion. So you're saying they were expelled, but what happened to those who did not want to move?
Yes.
Was it accompanied by more than just an expulsion?
Indeed. The method for expelling, whether it was a village or a neighborhood, was the same. The method was to encircle the village or the neighborhood from 3 flanks and leave one flank open with the hope that the occupying forces would intimidate the population to the extent that it would flee, it would leave under the threat of occupation. Now, in many cases, the population, especially in the rural areas, did not want naturally to leave their homes where they lived for hundreds of years. And in order to force them to leave, in quite few cases, either villagers were executed in order to intimidate the others and cause them to flee, and in about 30 to 40 cases, the whole male population of the villages were massacred in order to bring the ethnic cleansing to a completion. We should maybe give the numbers. Palestine had around 800 villages at the time. 530 villages were expelled.
Frozen?
I'm back. I hope you are too.
Yes, you're back. You were saying
Yeah, I'm sorry. There was, I don't know what
800
happened.
villages.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, there were 800 villages, 530 villages were expelled, and you can continue from there. Thank you.
That's right.
Can you proceed?
Yes, I can proceed. I can hear you now.
Yes, okay. So you were saying 800 villages, 533 villages were expelled, huh?
That's right.
Yes. Now, then what happened to these villages that were then taken over?
Yes. The villages that were occupied were wiped out physically, and on the ruins, the Israelis either built Jewish settlements or planted recreational forests. In the cities, the Palestinian neighborhoods were repopulated by Jewish immigrants who came either from Europe or from the Arab countries.
And what happened to the names of the Palestinian villages like Lubia and Sauria and so on? What happened to the names? Were they retained?
Yes, yes, that's a good point. All the villages were renamed in the places where instead of the village, a Jewish settlement was built. The settlement would receive a name that either was a Hebrew version of the Arabic name. One should say that Arabic and Hebrew are very close as languages, or a different name. The Israeli archaeologists were recruited in some places to put a claim that these villages were actually originally 2,000 years ago biblical places. So in some places, biblical names were given to the village. There was a special naming committee that made these decisions. What would be the name for the new place?
Right. Now, as far as the UN partition plan was concerned, was there, in your view, a parity, or was it equitable in terms of the distribution, in terms of the division, in terms of the partition and the land allotted to the Jews and to Palestinians?
No. I think the United Partition Plan was a very bad plan. One has to remember that not only were the Palestinians 2/3 of the population, and they were granted only half of the country as a 2/3 of the population, they were asked to share the land, that is to give half of their homeland, to a group of people that most of them came about 3 years before. So you can imagine in Malaysia, if a group of people that would have come to your home country 3 years ago would be giving half of your home country to create their own state in it. I think every decent, reasonable person would say that this is not a fair and just solution. And this is why the Palestinians rejected the partition plan. But I should also say that I don't think that the Zionist leadership accepted the partition plan. We know from the documents that they decided to declare their acceptance of the partition plan only after they heard that the Palestinians are going to reject it. So they knew that in any case, it would not be a realistic program, and they could ignore it as well.
All right. Then so what was the final distribution that the Palestinians then were forced into accepting?
The Palestinians were asked to accept a state within 44% of Palestine in the end of the day, without a territorial integrity, divided between north and south, and without Jerusalem as their capital. That was the deal that was offered to the people of Palestine, and to accept a Jewish state in 56% of their homeland.
In how many percent? In
56%.
56%.
The Jewish state was accorded, according to the partition plan, 56% of the land of Palestine. 5-6.
Right. Now, according to my information, the Jews at that time constituted or owned land from about about 6% of the land that was owned or settled by the Jews. And they were given...
That is correct.
Yes, and they were given 56%.
Absolutely.
And
they were... the Zionist strategy until the 1940s they have attempted to create a Jewish space by purchasing land, by buying land. And all they could succeed through that means was to acquire 6 point something, I don't remember, 6.4 or something like that, percent of the land.
So just to clarify, so 6 point something given 56% of the land, and then
right,
and 94% of the Palestinians were given the balance, some 44% of the land.
That is absolutely true.
Right. Now, so of course, quite naturally, I don't know what happened. The Palestine, like you say, Malaysia, we will not accept it. We will rise up and we will rebel, strong arms. So the Palestinian and the Arabs, how did they react to this?
Well, the Palestinian leadership rejected the partition plan. The Arab League decided also not to accept it. But one should say that they did offer the United Nations different means. They said, why don't you, and this was the official position of the Palestinian leadership and the Arab governments. They suggested that, as in every other country in the Middle East, the democratic principle should be implemented. Namely, if the mandate comes to an end, the people of Palestine, whoever was in Palestine at that moment, should vote about their future vision. And they suggested democratic decision and to find out what the majority of the people who lived in Palestine wanted. So you had two peace plans, if you want. One was the partition peace plan of the United Nations, and the other one was, in a way, an Arab and Palestinian peace plan. We said, we want the same fate as Egypt and Iraq and Tunisia and Algeria, where the people would be asked what is their vision for the future. How would they like to define their future in national terms?
So what happened to that proposal?
Well, some members, as you may remember, the United Nations established a special committee called UNSCOP, the United Nations Special Committee of Palestine, which had in it some member states of the United Nations organization.
Yes.
And that committee was asked to prepare a peace plan. And they could not agree totally about the peace plan. The majority of the members of UNSCOP adopted what we call today the partition plan and brought it to a vote on the 29th of November 1947. But there was a small group of states that were asking for a different plan to be presented to the United Nations, which was more or less based on the Arab and Palestinian idea of how to solve the question. The partition plan won 2/3 support of the United Nations General Assembly at the time. The other plan, which was called the minority plan of UNSCOP, had an equal number of supporters and people who objected to it. One should also mention, of course, that the United Nations at the time had a very small number of member states because quite a few of the countries in Asia and in Africa were still under colonial rule at the time.
Yes. So then there was, in 1948, there was all this, as you say, ethnic cleansing of villages and so on. And at the end of that, what was the balance in terms of the apportionment of land?
Well, when the war subsided, when the ethnic cleansing came to an end, the Jewish state took over 93% of the land in what became Israel. About 100,000 Palestinians were left out of the population of 1 million that used to live in that area that became the Jewish state. Apart from scores of villages, most of the villages, as I said, 530, were turned either into Jewish settlement or forests. And the rest of the Palestinians, 750,000 of them, became refugees, scattered all over the neighboring countries and in the West Bank and in Gaza, in refugee camps managed first by international charity organizations and from 1950 onwards by the United Nations.
In the coming to the spring, now you have described right, and so they actually you have also described an account of a resident of the village of Tantura, if you recall, and that's at your page 65, which is very poignant, but I won't, I'll just, Your Honours, I'll just refer to it, but not necessarily have the witness go through it. It's quite a long one. So you have written a very poignant actual account that from your historical records of a resident of the village of Tantura and what he went through and the kind of turmoil and the catastrophic that happened to him, right? I just wanted to confirm that, yes. Now, I want to bring you to the spring of now, ethnic cleansing, according to the final report of the Commission of Experts, if you are not familiar with it, you can so state, but the final report of the Commission of Experts established pursuant to Security Council Resolution 780 of 1992, which was appointed by the Security Council with regard to the ethnic cleansing committed in the former Yugoslavia. They said that ethnic cleansing could fall within the meaning of the Genocide Convention. Are you familiar with that report?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
I am.
Now, do you, broadly speaking, do you agree with their conclusion that ethnic cleansing, depending on the circumstances, could very well form part of an offense under the under the Genocide Convention?
Yes, yes, I do. I should say that to clarify my position, that in 1948, the Zionist plan was to get rid of the Palestinians from Palestine. In a way, if you would have told the Zionist leadership, do you mind that all the Palestinians would move, let's say, to Iraq, they would have accepted it. Namely, they did not feel the need to exterminate, destroy the Palestinians in that respect of a genocide. However, I think that the fact that the Palestinians could only be expelled to the borders of the Jewish state meant that despite the plan to ethnically cleanse them, they remained from a Zionist perspective an existential problem. And because of that, and from an historical perspective, I leave it to you, the legal experts, to decide about it legally. I'm not a legal expert, but I'm an historian. And from an historical perspective, the fact that the ethnic cleansing in Palestine in 1948 did not solve the problem for the Zionist leadership, turned the ethnic cleansing ideology of the Zionist movement and later the State of Israel into an existential threat to the Palestinians that, as I wrote in the book with Noam Chomsky, could lead, it hasn't led as yet, but has the potential of leading to genocidal policies. And in some cases, these genocidal policies were already executed, and we may come back to this later, in the attack on Gaza since 2006. So I don't think there was a genocidal plan in 1948. I think the plan was to get rid of the Palestinians. However, the fact that getting rid of the Palestinians did not solve the problem, also because of Palestinian steadfastness and the Arab world's position, in historical perspective, turns the ethnic cleansing into something that potentially can and may already have turned into genocidal policies. I'm not a legal expert, so I'm not giving you a legal definition. I'm giving you my assessment as an historian and as an activist, if you want, but not, of course, not as a legal expert.
Yes, so the seeds of this genocide, once the expulsion occurred, they moved to the borders, all right, as history will reveal, and I will go through this bit by bit, that the seeds of this genocide were sown, if you like, in that expulsion exercise.
And even more than that, if you have a state which has as its ideological infrastructure the idea that the local indigenous native ethnic group has no right to be there, and of course your main effort is first to get rid of it, not to kill it, if you want. If this remains, and it is the case, I'm sorry to say, this remains your ideological infrastructure, there is always the potential that the line between expulsion and extermination would be crossed, either intentionally or even unintentionally, because this basic idea that someone has no right to be in their homeland, for me, is a genocidal idea. And that doesn't mean, as an historian, that I'm not aware that I would not describe the act in 1948 as genocide. I describe it as an ethnic cleansing, which is a crime against humanity as it is. But I'm saying that, historically speaking, this began an era of strategies that had the potential of becoming genocidal, and in some cases already became genocidal.
All right, so let's examine those, let's go through those set of situations then. We have, for example, you're familiar with Sabra and Shatila?
Yes, I am.
In 1982, we have heard a lot of evidence here from actual victims of how after there was an evacuation of the PLO, there was a promise by the United Nations to protect the defenseless people who were left there, and then and what happened is, on the eve of the episode in Sabra and Shatila, the forces, somehow these UN forces disappeared, and then there was this massacre that occurred over 40 hours. Now, these was the settlers. We have heard evidence. These were the people, part of the people who were expelled. Were they not from the 1948 situation, and ended up first in tents, then in mud huts, and then in zinc and sometimes brick structures in Sabra Shatila?
Yes, I think it's a good example to what I was talking about. You expelled the Palestinians in 1948, and you think that you have solved the problem by forcing the Palestinians to live in refugee camps in Lebanon. But what happens if the Palestinians in the refugee camps have not given up on the struggle for liberation and independence? What are you going to do with this? And Ariel Sharon was the Minister of Defense in 1981, under the Prime Minister of the time, Menachem Begin, went from ethnic cleansing, I think, to genocidal policies in 1982, because you cannot expel the Palestinians further from Lebanon. So eventually you will have to decide that you want to do something more drastic. And I think Sabra and Shatila was one of these chapters where you move from expelling to destroying, because there is a limit to how many times can you expel people. And I think 1982 was a warning to all of us what is going to happen, or what happens now, if the Palestinians in the refugee camps are not going to accept their life as refugees as a given, and would continue to struggle for their right of return.
Okay, so these were the Palestinians who were outside the borders and in another country, Lebanon. Now we talk about
That's
those
right.
who, sorry?
Yes.
Yes.
I think so.
Yes. Now we talk about those who are within the within that geographical structure known, and these areas are Gaza and the West Bank. Now, if you in Gaza, for example, you talk in your chapter 7 of the first rains operation in 2005. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes. In 2005, the situation in Gaza changed from an Israeli perspective. They thought they had a good control of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and that they have succeeded in eliminating any resistance from the Palestinians to the continued occupation and colonization. But Gaza proved to be a different case with the rise of the Hamas and with a different kind of resistance to the Israeli occupation and settlement. The Israeli reaction began to be formulated in that year, 2005 and 2006. And in fact, it would be employed in a parallel way in Lebanon in 2006 and in the Gaza Strip in 2005. And the idea was to incrementally, in a gradual way, to react with all the military force you have against a civilian population so as to deter it from any future resistance. In 2006, the Israelis called that particular strategy that they already employed in first rains as the Dahiya strategy. Dahiya is the southern Shiite quarter of Beirut. And in 2006, the Israelis demolished it entirely from the air, using all the military might that they had. So the idea is you have a civilian population, and you have the best equipped using tanks, gunships, aircrafts against the civilian population, so as to, as the Israeli General Chief of Staff at the time put it, to make sure that nobody would ever react in any way against the Israeli policies. The result on the ground is, if you use F-16s, Merkava tanks, or gunships, is genocidal, in the sense that it destroys population in a systematic way in an area that is cordoned, is encircled since 1994 with a wall. We keep talking about the wall in the West Bank, but we forget that in 1994, Gaza was encircled with a huge wall itself. And when a population has nowhere to run, they have no way to get away from this ghetto, and you use all that military force on it, the number of casualties is very high, and the effects are genocidal to my mind. And that's what I wrote in the book I co-authored with Professor Noam Chomsky.
Right, yes. In fact, they gave these operations, of bombing, complete destruction of areas in their entirety. They gave them first rains 2005, Operation Summer Rains, June 2006, Autumn Clouds 2007, May 2008. These were the fancy names, really insulting the seasons that were given as part of this operation. You write about this, do you not?
Yes, I do. I found the names particularly sadistic in a way, because to use these names of the beautiful seasons we have here in Israel and Palestine, and you talk about rain when actually you're raining bombs of the worst kind on civilians, of women, children, and men, I found this particularly cynical. And I think I wanted to highlight the tension between the names used and the operations executed to show the dehumanization of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And I think and that's why I decided, I must say, after many, many hesitations, I decided to call the Israeli strategy in the Gaza Strip incremental genocide. Because if you dehumanize people to such an extent that when you rain on them napalm bombs, 1,000 kilo bombs, and you call it rain, that means you don't treat them anymore as human beings.
Now we come to Operation Castlead, which you also write about in your book together with Noam Chomsky. Now you talked about the fact that in February 2008, Israel's defense minister said Palestinians risked a Shoah. I don't know whether I pronounced the name correctly, but what is a Shoah?
Sorry, could you repeat it, please? I couldn't hear
you write in your book that in February 2008, Israel's defense minister, Sharon, said
yes.
Palestinians risked a Shoah, S-H-O-A-H.
Oh, yes.
So what is Shoah?
Yeah. Shoah is, of course, the Hebrew word to the genocide of the Jews that took place in the Second World War in Europe. The Nazi extermination of the Jews is called Shoah. It doesn't have any other meaning in Hebrew. So if a minister of defense or the head of the army or a prime minister in Israel says that he wants to inflict such a punishment on the Palestinian people, the only English translation for the word Shoah is genocide.
And so was there in fact a planning to do this Shoah in Gaza?
Well, I don't have documents to that extent. What I do know, especially from the brave soldiers who were willing to give us testimonies within an NGO called Soldiers Against Silence, or Breaking the Silence, which is a group of brave Israeli soldiers who felt very bad for what they had done and published their testimonies later on. We know that the orders for the soldiers on the ground and during the training was to treat the Gaza villages and the city of Gaza as a military outpost that has to be demolished. I don't know whether this is a Shoah or not, but this is a total elimination of the civilian population.
Now this operation, it has come to be known as Operation Castlead, and this is, you say that it lasted, from your book, lasted 3 weeks, 1,400 Palestinians killed, including 300 children, hundreds of unarmed civilians, large areas razed, thousands homeless, economy in ruins. Was that your assessment as a historian of what transpired?
Yes, and I think what is no less important is to remember that even at the time when there is no military assault, the people in Gaza are strangulated by a control over their food supply, their medicine, their basic needs. And people die not just from military attack, but also from malnutrition and lack of medicine and lack of elementary food supplies. So it's a comprehensive strategy of trying to starve and to succumb a population that refuses to accept the Israeli occupation as a way of life.
Now, so Gaza, I just forgot to mention, Gaza, after the 67 war, Gaza and the West Bank were occupied and continue to be occupied till today by Israel.
That's right.
Yes. And you also quote somewhere in your book, I've got the page here, that you quote a UN rapporteur as saying Gaza was like a large prison with a key thrown away.
Absolutely, absolutely. John Dugard, who was the special rapporteur for the United Nations, was shocked when he visited Gaza and saw the conditions, and he realized that this was like a huge prison that incarcerates almost 2 million people in a similar way that anyone who lives in a jail lives. But they are incarcerated for they didn't commit any felony. They have not committed any crime. Their only crime is that they are Palestinians who live in Gaza.
Now, following on from that, you talk about, so the conditions of life were created that, were quite virtually impossible to endure. I mean, they can't go out fishing, food is controlled, medicine is controlled, and then they come and bomb you, summer rains, autumn clouds, and so on a sustained basis. In fact, yesterday there were 3 airstrikes against Gaza. I don't know whether...
That's right.
Yes. So, this is largely a civilian population. It's been described as the most densely populated city or area in the world. Would that be right?
That is absolutely right. And had it not been for the tunnels that they excavated in order to bring in food and material, I think the situation would have been worse. A brave Israeli journalist about 2 weeks ago, Itzhak Laor, wrote that the tunnels in Gaza remind him of the tunnels of the Warsaw Ghetto, which enabled Jews to survive the Nazi occupation for a while because of these tunnels. Of course, he was immediately condemned for doing that comparison, but I think we have to realize that now the tunnels are under danger of being blocked not just by the Israelis but also by the new Egyptian government. And I'm very worried and apprehensive about the fate of the people in Gaza in this year and in the coming months because of the new reality on the ground.
So this reality, I think, in fact, you have referred to as a genocidal reality in your book with Chomsky at page 190.
Yes, indeed, because for me, and I think that clarifies the distinction between ethnic cleansing and genocide. Again, I'm not a legal expert, so I'm making ethical and moral and historical distinctions. Ethnic cleansing appears, I think, where there is a space to move the people outside one location to the other. But very much as in the cases of the massacres in 1948, when the Israeli army has a situation in which it cannot move the people. Here we're talking about 2 million people, not just a population of a village. But it's the same method. If you cannot move out the people from their location, and you don't want these people to be there, you move from ethnic cleansing to genocide, to massacre, to killing the people rather than expelling them.
Yes, and also creating the conditions of life, the economy, the physical, the cultural, the religious, the renaming villages, and so on. So this is a total package, as it were.
Absolutely, and I think in order not to get entangled with ethical issues, when I try to interview the Israeli generals and ask them, so what is your final strategy? If you're going to starve these people and you're going to create unbearable conditions for them, what do you expect them to do? And the first answer would be, oh, they would leave. And I said, but they can't leave. Nobody's going to allow them to leave. And they shrugged. They said, we don't know. I don't think they even want to think aloud, if you want, about the possibility. But I think deep inside they are aware that the kind of policies that they are pursuing are genocidal policies, even if they won't call it. And this quote that you brought us from Sharon about the Shoah shows that every now and then the real vision comes out in the speeches or interviews of those who are responsible for the policy.
Yes, so that reality, the genocidal reality. So, Professor Ilan Pappe, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your extremely lucid and extremely informative account. We are eternally grateful to you.
Thank you.
And if you would just wait a while we take questions from the amicus curiae who are conducting the defense, or maybe even clarification from the judges. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
I have a few questions for this witness, if I may. Dr. Pappe, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello. I will not ask many questions, so just a few questions then.
Indeed.
Have you been called a revisionist historian?
Have I been called a revisionist historian? Is this a question?
Yes. Have you been called a revisionist historian?
Yes, I think people grapple with how to call a group of historians, and of which I was one, because we were the first Israeli professional historians. There were two other colleagues, there were three of us, who challenged the official narrative of the State of Israel. I'm sorry. The term revisionist in Israel is not working very well because the right-wing Zionist movement is called in Israel the revisionist movement. So if you call Israeli historians revisionist historians, it's confusing. So the term used in Israel was the new historians. But for people abroad, we were like the American historians who challenged the official American history of the Cold War. They were also called the revisionist historians.
And your current view of history is a minority view. Do you agree?
In Israel itself, yes, definitely. It's a minority view within Israel, yes.
Thank you. Your parents, they escaped Nazi Germany, yes?
That's right.
And in an interview with The Guardian, you had mentioned, I'm quoting verbatim, please correct me if I'm wrong, you had mentioned, had it not been for the Zionist movement, my parents and many like them would not have escaped. Yes?
That is true. That's a correct quote.
You are alive today because of Zionism. Yes?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you feel guilty? Do you feel guilty being alive because of it?
No, I think that because I'm alive and because as an historian I understand something that I think even my parents understood, but not many of their friends, that coming to Palestine did not mean or did not have to end in the dispossession of the local people. There was a possibility to come to Palestine and live next to the Palestinians or alongside the Palestinians and not instead of the Palestinians. My cue on this, by the way, is a famous letter by Mahatma Gandhi to the very famous Jewish philosopher Martin Buber. When Martin Buber wanted Gandhi to support the Zionist idea in the 1930s, Gandhi said to him what probably my parents would have said: there's nothing wrong of the Jews looking for a refuge in Palestine. There is something very wrong when they think that the only way that they can establish that refuge is by kicking out Palestinians. And I think that this is what I mean, that I'm thankful for those who saved my parents, but I condemn them for later on expelling the Palestinians.
Would you agree that the body of your work and your views could be to assuage the guilt of being alive because of Zionism?
No, I don't see it that way. I think I come from a comfort zone. I come from the side that lives comfortably while the other people are oppressed. And I feel on two levels that it is my duty to do what I do. It has very little to do with guilt. In fact, I feel very well with what I'm doing. One is because my parents were victims of genocidal policies by the Nazis, I don't want to be part of a new genocide. And I don't want someone in my name to destroy and expel another people. That's one reason I'm doing what I'm doing. The second reason is I think that if you are in a position of comfort or relative comfort, you have a duty to help those who are oppressed. I feel I have no problem with my parents or friends like theirs who understood that they were received with open hands by the Palestinians. And I think most of the Jewish settlers, and this is something we have to remember, most of the Jewish settlers when they came were received by the Palestinians as everyone in the Arab world receives guests. We know about the Arab hospitality. But once I come as a guest to your house, especially as a refugee to your house, and I claim that this house is actually mine, and eventually I kick you out of that house, I have violated your hospitality. And this is something I cannot accept as a human being, first and foremost.
One final question, Dr. Pappe. Is it true that prior to 1947, the people who inhabited the land that became Israel was really a melting pot of different ethnicities, such as the Greeks, the Turks, the Arabs, the Armenians, the Persians, the Sudanese, the Algerians, the Samaritans, the Tatars, and the Georgians? Would you agree to that?
No, I don't think so. I think that every ethnic group in the world in 1947 was made of certain mixtures of populations in the prior centuries to its creation. What is important is not so much the ethnic mix, it was the indigeneity of the people. Namely, we are talking here about a population that doesn't matter however it defined itself and however its ethnic fabric was, this was a population that lived for at least a millennium, if not more, at the same place. And at the time that most people in Southeast Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America and in the Arab world said to the European powers that colonized them, we want independence, we want sovereignty, the international community recognized this right. And the only place in the Arab world where this right was not recognized was in Palestine. And this is, I think, an injustice that has to be rectified.
Dr. Pappe, thank you for your time and participation in this tribunal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ilan Pappe. I have no re-examination. Thank you for having given us such a brilliant testimony. As I said, and I repeat, really grateful to you. Are there any questions? Just another few minutes to see if there are any other questions from members of the judges, panel of judges. Are there any questions?
Hello, Professor Ilan. Is there anywhere in your books that you have given to us that reference to the name Amos Yaron was made? If there is, could you please kindly tell me the page numbers, please?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I repeat, is there anywhere in the books that you have given to us that reference to the name Amos Yaron was made?
Amos Yaron.
Yes, you've given me
yes.
2 documents. Can I find the names in the books? If there is, can you please show me the page number?
I don't think Amos Yaron is someone who was involved in the 1982 massacre. I wrote in the 2 books given to you on 1948 and on 2005 onwards. So I don't think he played a very important role in the periods I was looking at. I think he was very crucial, if I remember correctly, for 1982.
Yeah. This book was
I
published.
haven't written on 1982 as such.
You've written the report based on 1982 massacre only.
No.
Am I right?
Yes, but I don't think it appears in my book, because my books deal with 48 and the Gaza operations against Gaza. So I may have mentioned him in passing. I don't remember, but I'm sorry I cannot be very helpful there. I think he belongs more to the episode in Sabra and Shatila, if I remember correctly.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, then I ask that Professor. Sorry.
Excuse me. I just conferred with co-counsel. May I be permitted one more question? Thank you. Professor Pappe, I'm sorry to inconvenience you. Just one more question. Do you agree that your parents came to Israel to escape the Nazi Holocaust, the Nazi genocide?
Yes, I do agree.
And do you agree that the people who came to Israel subsequently did so to ensure that that type of event would never happen again to a person of Jewish background?
Not entirely, because I'll explain why. I think the Jews who escaped Germany and Europe during the time leading to the Nazi Holocaust, that is in the 1930s, were indeed refugees looking for a safe haven. The Jews who came between 1882 and 1930 and laid the foundation for the Jewish state, by the way, were the people who eventually committed the ethnic cleansing in 1948, came as colonizers. They came for the same reason that Europeans came to Africa or Asia or Latin America. They came to colonize, and they were part of the colonial enterprise, which, as you know, even in the case of the Americans, I think the America is a good example. The people who genocided the Native Americans, who the Americans later called the Indians, right, the Red Indians. The people who genocided the Native Americans were mostly refugees from religious persecution in Europe. So I think in one of my books, I don't remember which one, I try to give an example which I use a lot with my students to explain this balance between the fact that Jews were in the 1930s refugees and what they did in Palestine. If you look for a safe place for battered women, let's say, or abused children, and you find a flat where you want to host them so that they will not be under any danger anymore, but in order to have this flat, you kick out the people of that flat, you throw them out of the window or the balcony, or you kill them, you have created a worse crime in order to solve the previous crime. So in other words, the fact that Jews were looking for a safe place did not justify the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And in fact, as you may know, after the Holocaust, most of the Jews who survived the Holocaust in Europe did not wish to go to Palestine. They wanted to go to the United States of America. But in 1946, the Americans decided, for anti-Semitic reasons, that they don't want to have any more Jews in America, and this forced the Jews to look for another place and help the Zionist project. So, in other words, if you are a refugee, it doesn't give you the license to kill someone or to expel someone. In fact, it should make you a better human being who would understand that it's a terrible crime to make someone a refugee. Of course, it's even worse.
Professor, you did point out that the Jews from Europe wanted to go to America but could not because of the anti-Semitism there.
That's right. In
So
46,
do you
there
not
was a
agree?
special, ruling in
So
the
do you
Senate.
not agree that the
But of course
Jews?
this would change later on.
So do you not agree that the Jews who went to Palestine, who went, was for the
Sorry?
reason the Jews who went to Palestine did so to avoid, to make sure that there would not be a recurrence of the Holocaust that they just suffered?
That may be true about the Jews who came between 33 and 46. The question is, was the best way to ensure that there would not be another Holocaust
Was
by
to create
keeping
a
off the
state.
local people? My contention is that by doing what they did in 1948 and by doing what they do now, they are again endangering the Jewish people around the world with another Holocaust. So maybe their intentions were good, but you know, we have a saying in Hebrew, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are no other questions from members of the panel, then it remains for us once again to thank Professor Ilan Pappe for his very enlightening, clear testimony. And can the
Thank you.
witness be released for his to continue his duties? Are released. This word we use, released, is not that we had you captive before, Professor Ilan. It's just a legal, archaic expression. So, yes, you are officially released, to use our jargon. Thank you very much indeed, and we hope to be able to host you one of these days in within Malaysia itself.
So do I.
Thank
I'm
you,
looking
and
forward for the opportunity.
right. Thank you, and goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.